I've always been the kind of person who steps up to assist a friend, particularly when their request is straightforward. And that's precisely what transpired the day my longtime companion, John, reached out to me. We have a long history together. Our friendship dates back to college, and despite life leading us down separate paths, him in finance and me in tech, we've managed to keep in touch. Hey there, John's tone was laid back on the call, just like usual. I would appreciate your assistance. Could you assist Liza during my absence? I'm leaving town for a few days, and she requires some tasks to be completed around the house. Liza, his wife, consistently treated me with kindness. Indeed, my acquaintance with her stretched back to the same time I met John. She possessed a serene demeanor, exuding a grace that drew attention effortlessly. I always viewed her simply as a friend. She was married to John, and I honored that boundary. When John approached me for assistance with some home repairs, it felt like an obvious choice. Absolutely, my friend, it's no trouble at all. I informed him. We came to a consensus that I would go to their house the following day to assist her with anything she required. To be honest, I anticipated just a few hours of simple upkeep. I gave it no thought at all. The following afternoon, I made my way to their location. The house stood elegantly in a serene neighborhood, perhaps a touch more opulent than I preferred, yet I refrained from passing judgment. As I rapped on the door, Liza greeted me with a friendly smile, donned in an apron, her hair casually tied back in a loose ponytail. She seemed to be caught up in something, yet she welcomed me with that familiar warmth I had always recalled. Hey, I appreciate you stopping by, she said, moving aside to allow me entry. John mentioned that you would be arriving to assist with the plumbing problem. This sink issue has persisted for some time, and I've been intending to address it. Absolutely, happy to help. I responded, trailing behind her into the kitchen to examine it closely. The sink was clogged, yet it was nothing overly complex. I thought it would be a simple solution. Liza was pleasant and courteous, yet there was an intriguing quality about her that felt slightly amiss. She appeared somewhat more unsettled than normal. At first, I struggled to identify it, yet an unmistakable tension lingered in the atmosphere. So, how are things unfolding for you and John? I inquired, attempting to engage in light conversation as I focused on my tasks. She took a brief moment, her hand gently placed on the countertop as she gazed at me, her expression more tender than normal. It's been fine, I suppose, she murmured, her voice fading away. Sometimes, it seems like he's just overwhelmed with his work commitments. I find myself managing everything solo. I looked up at her, attempting to decipher her expression. She turned her gaze from the room, her eyes fixed on the window, seemingly adrift in her own reflections. This caught me off guard. Liza had always appeared so collected, so well organized. I had never encountered that aspect of her before. Is everything all right? I inquired, placing the wrench on the counter and pivoting to meet her gaze. She appeared to emerge from her thoughts, offering me a faint smile, yet it failed to illuminate her eyes. Yes, I'm doing well. It's just that, you understand how it can be, life can feel a bit too much at times. I was at a loss for words in response to that. I simply nodded, feeling uncertain about how to reply. The situation felt somewhat uncomfortable. I attempted to redirect my attention to the sink, yet an unsettling sense lingered, suggesting that this situation involved more than merely a blocked drain. Thank you for doing this, by the way, Liza said, her voice now tinged with a softer note. Your kindness means a lot to me. Absolutely fine. Glad to assist. I uttered, mustering a smile. I aimed to uplift the atmosphere, yet an unshakable weight lingered, making it feel more burdensome than necessary. After I wrapped up the sink repairs, while tidying up, Liza inquired if I'd like to join her for a drink. Initially, I didn't give it much thought. Well, she was simply being courteous, wasn't she? As we settled in with a glass of wine, there was something distinctly altered about her. The dialogue remained casual initially, but over time, the subjects began to change. She started to share her experiences with John, reflecting on the transformations that had occurred since their marriage and the growing distance between them. It seemed as though she was searching for a companion, someone who would lend an ear. As the evening progressed, I found it increasingly impossible to overlook the shifting dynamics between us. Perhaps it was the intensity of her gaze or the shift in our dialogue towards more intimate topics. I had always prided myself on being attentive, yet this evening, it seemed as though I was venturing into uncharted territory. Yet, I found myself unable to understand why, but a part of me resisted the urge to cease. The evening began in a perfectly ordinary manner. I make an effort to maintain it like that. Having repaired the sink, I felt inclined to wrap up my day, yet Liza urged me to linger for a drink. She consistently exhibited politeness and was the epitome of a gracious host. Having known her for quite some time, I understood that her casual offers were not to be overanalyzed. Yet, there was an unmistakable change in her demeanor this evening. We gathered around the kitchen table, the gentle illumination from the overhead light creating delicate shadows that danced in the room's corners. It was one of those rare moments when everything felt a bit more subdued than usual, and the ordinary things appeared to hold greater significance than they ought to. As she poured the wine, she inquired if I desired another glass, her voice carrying a slightly languid rhythm. There was a change in her essence. "Thank you," I replied, accepting the glass from her hand. "Are you really all right, though? You appear to be a bit different this evening." She let out a slow breath, her gaze fixed on her glass for a brief moment before meeting my eyes again. Her expression was far away, and I sensed she was contemplating something deeply. "Sometimes, I feel so alone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she feared someone might be listening. "It seems like John is perpetually occupied, and I can't help but feel a bit overlooked, you know?" Initially, I was unsure of how to reply. She always appeared to have everything in order, as if she were the steadfast foundation that held their life intact. Her words took me by surprise, particularly with John being away at the moment. It was unsettling to hear her confess that, despite having an ideal life on paper, she was grappling with hidden struggles beneath the surface. "I'm here if you need someone to talk to," I said, attempting to provide solace, yet deep down, I realized that my offer extended beyond mere comfort. A delicate change lingered in the atmosphere, an elusive sensation I couldn't quite identify. Liza nodded, yet her gaze remained fixed on me. "Text, I understand," she murmured, her tone heavy with an unsettling gravity. "It's simply that I feel like no one truly comprehends. John, my friends just don't understand my feelings." She took a moment, then continued, "But you've consistently shown me such kindness." A knot twisted in my stomach. There was a certain quality in her voice, a depth in her gaze that captivated me. It lacked the warmth of a genuine friendship gaze. It was a departure from what I was accustomed to seeing. "I'm simply here to assist," I remarked, attempting to ease the growing tension in the dialogue. However, Liza appeared oblivious to the suggestion. She placed her glass on the table and leaned in a bit, her hands intertwined before her. "I understand you are," she murmured, her tone soft and nearly personal, "but it's more than that. You make me feel acknowledged, like I'm more than just a partner in a relationship." I found myself turning my gaze, an unexpected wave of discomfort washing over me. The wine, the soft glow of the light, her manner of speaking, it all carried an air of intimacy that was almost palpable. She had moved beyond the mere issue of a clogged sink. She sought more than mere assistance with the household. "Text, I'm not sure that's something I can truly assist with, Liza," I replied, attempting to maintain a composed demeanor, even as my heart raced more than it ought to have. She took her time to respond. For an instant, it seemed as though time had frozen. Then she let out a gentle sigh, her gaze becoming tender. "I understand you're being courteous, but I felt the need to share this with someone." Her voice trembled just a bit as she spoke, deepening my sense of discomfort. "I never anticipated you would grasp it, yet perhaps, just perhaps, you might lend an ear." "I'm uncertain." I nodded, feeling a sense of uncertainty about how to respond further. She was laying bare her soul, and I felt as though I was intruding on a moment that was not meant for me. It was more than merely the wine or the solitude. Her gaze was fixed on me, a silent quest for something I felt utterly incapable of providing. "I can't guarantee anything," I finally said, my voice softer now, "but I'm here if you need someone to lean on. I will always be here to hear you out." Liza offered a faint, nearly melancholic smile. "Thank you. It seems that this is everything I require at the moment." I felt the urge to express more, to offer her comfort, yet a voice in the recesses of my mind urged me to depart. I found myself in a situation where I had crossed a boundary, uncertain of how to return, yet I felt compelled to stay for someone who evidently required assistance. A wave of guilt washed over me for being present at that moment. Feeling a sense of guilt, as I was aware, beneath the surface, that the situation was far more complex than it appeared. "I suppose it's time for me to head out," I remarked, rising to my feet and reaching for my jacket. "John will return shortly, and it seems you could use a break." She nodded, yet her gaze held on me a moment longer than necessary. As I made my way to the door, she called out to me, her voice gentle. "I truly appreciate your presence, thank you. I can't imagine my life without your presence." I managed a smile and nodded, sensing that I had just escaped from something elusive and perplexing. Yet, beneath the surface, an unsettling sense lingered, suggesting that the events that had unfolded were far from concluded. It left me pondering the lengths I might go to maintain John's favor, as my certainty began to waver. The days following that night carried a distinct air. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, an unspoken change that I found impossible to overlook. I repeatedly reassured myself that it was insignificant, that I was merely overanalyzing the situation. However, the reality was that matters were beginning to unravel. Liza and I had always shared a camaraderie, yet this moment felt distinctly unique. Each time I encountered her now, an unvoiced tension lingered between us, something simmering just below the surface. She would smile at me, yet her gaze would hold for a moment that felt just a touch extended. I observed it primarily in moments of solitude, when distractions faded away, and John was absent. It extended beyond her gaze, however. There was a certain quality in her voice, an intimacy in her inquiries that felt unexpectedly deep. It felt like she was probing, gauging my reaction to see if I would take the bait. I made every effort to steer clear of solitary moments with her, yet it proved to be quite a challenge at times. John's work schedule was packed, and there were numerous occasions when it was just the two of us, such as that afternoon I bumped into her at the grocery store. I hadn't intended to drop by her place afterward, but when she offered me coffee, it seemed nearly impossible to decline. Perhaps I was attempting to persuade myself that it was merely innocent. Perhaps I believed that by overlooking it for a while, it would simply vanish. Yet, the moment I crossed the threshold of her home, I sensed it immediately. The atmosphere crackles with the same intensity, the same electric energy lingering in the air. "How has your work been treating you lately?" Liza inquired, offering me a cup of coffee as we settled onto the couch. Her demeanor was relaxed, yet her gaze conveyed a different story. Her gaze held a certain anticipation, as if she were waiting for something to unfold between us. "It has been acceptable," I remarked, attempting to maintain a sense of neutrality. "Occupied, yet nothing particularly unusual." She acknowledged with a nod, then brought her cup to her lips for a sip of her coffee. The stillness enveloping us was thick, brimming with an unnameable tension. It was different from the past when our conversations revolved around the weather or light topics. This experience was unlike any other, and for the first time, I became aware of how much I had been steering clear of this type of dialogue. "I've been reflecting deeply on our conversation from the other night," she said softly, placing her coffee on the table before us. "I truly appreciate your willingness to listen. It's been challenging, and I'm unsure who I can confide in." I hesitated, uncertain of how to reply. It was clear she had moved on from discussing the sink. I felt a sense of relief in offering my assistance, yet the words seemed to lack substance as they escaped my lips. She gazed at me, and I could see that familiar intensity reflected in her eyes. Something enigmatic, yet undeniably more than mere friendliness. She appeared to pause briefly before she continued speaking. "You know, I've been reflecting on the length of our acquaintance," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I've always sensed that there was something unique between us. I can't shake the feeling that perhaps I'm overanalyzing the situation. My heart began to race. What was she expressing? I struggled to maintain a calm expression, even as I sensed the beads of sweat beginning to gather at the nape of my neck. I'm uncertain about your meaning, I replied with caution, attempting to steer the dialogue away from a path I wasn't ready to navigate. Liza regarded me with a blend of hesitation and an emotion that teetered on the edge of hope. We've always had a good rapport, and you've consistently supported me. I can't shake the feeling that there's something deeper, something that transcends mere friendship. The atmosphere in the room suddenly surged, as if the temperature had skyrocketed by 100 degrees in an instant. The words surged within me, yet none felt quite fitting. What was going on? Could it be that she was expressing what I believed she was expressing? She had moved beyond the need for a favor. She was seeking something different, something I wasn't certain I was prepared to offer. Liza, it seems we've gone too far, I remarked, my tone strained. I'm simply offering my assistance, all right? This doesn't require any deep analysis. She recoiled just a bit at my words, yet she remained steadfast. Instead, she drew nearer, her face just inches away from mine. I don't believe I'm overanalyzing it, she said gently. It seems we both sense an unspoken connection, a thread that has woven itself through our interactions, lingering in the background, even as we've hesitated to confront it. I felt confined. Escape was impossible. The weight in my chest intensified, thoughts swirling chaotically as I searched for the perfect words, yet it seemed that every utterance only deepened the turmoil. I really don't believe this is a wise choice, Liza, I remarked, rising to my feet suddenly. This is not something we should be engaging in. I want to ensure everything goes smoothly with John. You are his spouse, while I am his companion. She rose as well, her eyes gleaming with irritation. However, you fail to grasp the situation. John's absent, and I'm in need of assistance. I seek nothing beyond being truly seen, to feel valued as more than just his wife. I took a step back, disbelief washing over me, my heart racing wildly within my chest. Liza, this approach won't resolve the issues at hand. It's essential that you have a conversation with him. This isn't something I can help you with. For an extended pause, silence enveloped us both. The stillness lingered in the air, and a realization dawned upon me. It wasn't solely her. A change had occurred within me as well, an unfamiliar sensation that I struggled to understand. What's the most frustrating aspect? I found myself uncertain about my desire to proceed. Liza was the one to shatter the stillness first. I apologize. I regret having said that. I find myself at a loss, unsure of my next steps. I acknowledged with a nod, shifting my gaze toward the door. I had to depart before the situation became even more chaotic than it already was. I never intended to be the one to complicate matters further. Yet, beneath the surface, I understood that this was a moment beyond my control. The subsequent days passed in a haze. After our conversation, I hardly encountered Liza, and perhaps that was for the best. Each time our paths crossed, an unmistakable tension lingered between us, yet we both chose to remain silent about the incident. It felt as though we were both aware that speaking up would only complicate matters further. John sensed that something was amiss. His persistent inquiries about whether everything was all right between us spoke volumes. I found myself at a loss for words. How can I convey the tension without saying something that might ruin our friendship entirely? Well, I wasn't entirely truthful. I mentioned that all was well, that I was merely occupied with work and various other matters. Yet, the reality was, I wasn't okay. Doubt clouded my mind, leaving me uncertain of my thoughts. I found myself revisiting that moment in Liza's living room repeatedly, each time with a fresh perspective. Her words, the way she gazed at me, the way she drew nearer, everything about that moment was charged with intensity, so vivid. I had always viewed her merely as John's wife, but now she had transformed into someone entirely distinct in my perception. It filled me with dread. I discovered that I was steering clear of both of them whenever I could. I often found myself crafting excuses to depart early whenever we gathered, or I would simply remain in my apartment, too apprehensive to confront either of them. It had transcended Liza entirely. It was also about me. I never wanted to be the one who made a mistake. I never wanted to be the one to turn against my closest companion. On a quiet afternoon, I received a call from John. It had been a few days since I last heard from him, and there was an unusual quality to his voice when we spoke on the phone. He inquired whether I might be able to visit. He felt the urge to express his thoughts on a matter. I concurred, anticipating it would merely be a light conversation. As I stepped into their home, an unmistakable sense of something being off washed over me. Liza sat on the couch, her gaze averted from me. She gazed out the window, her complexion wan, her eyes glistening with tears. John stood by the door, arms crossed, his expression tight with tension. It was as if I had stepped right into the eye of a tempest. "Hey there, can we have a conversation?" John spoke, his tone deep and earnest. I acknowledged with a nod, despite being completely unaware of what lay ahead. "I sense that something hasn't felt right recently," he went on, his gaze momentarily darting to Liza. "I've observed it, and I'm not naive. What's happening with the two of you?" My heart sank. This caught me off guard. A bead of sweat trickled down the back of my neck, and my mouth felt parched all at once. "Could you clarify what you mean?" I inquired, making an effort to maintain a calm tone. "Do you understand what I'm getting at?" John remarked. Liza shared all the details with me. I stood still, unable to move. Thoughts surged through my mind, struggling to connect the dots of the unfolding situation. I glanced at Liza, yet she remained silent. She maintained her focus on the window, her expression betraying a deep sense of remorse. "I'm not quite sure I understand your point." I faltered, yet I could sense the truth escaping from within me. John released a sardonic chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief. "Do not deceive me, my friend. She revealed it all to me. She shared with me the details of your conversation. How you supported her in my absence. How you've been steering clear of me, steering clear of her, all this time. She even claimed that you kissed her." It seemed as though everything around me had collapsed. My thoughts vanished entirely, and I sensed my knees trembling, on the verge of collapsing. The room was enveloped in an oppressive stillness, and I understood that this was the moment. All that I had sought to conceal, all my wishes for it to remain in the shadows, was now laid bare for all to see. "I never intended for this to unfold," I admitted, my voice trembling. "I promise you, it wasn't that way. It was merely. I was assisting her. I failed to consider. I never imagined it would reach this point." Liza turned to face me, her eyes brimming with tears. "I didn't want this either," she whispered. I'm uncertain about what transpired." I found myself perplexed. "I sincerely apologize." Yet, the harm had already been inflicted. John was done with excuses. He gazed at me, a blend of pain and fury etched across his face, his demeanor solidifying. "Can you even begin to understand what this experience is like?" he inquired, his tone scarcely rising above a murmur. "You are my closest companion. You hold a special place in my heart. You went ahead and did this without my knowledge." I found myself at a loss for words in response to him. I found myself at a loss for words, unable to mend what had been broken. The words lodged themselves in my throat. Unproductive. I could perceive the profound pain he was experiencing, and I understood that regardless of my words, nothing would alter the situation. "I never thought you'd do this to me," John said, his voice faltering briefly before he steadied himself. "I'm uncertain about my trust in you now." It hit me like a blow to the stomach. The impact of his words resonated within me more profoundly than anything else ever could. John had always been my dearest companion, and now, in a fleeting moment, that bond was irrevocably broken. I'm at a loss for words. I spoke softly, sensing the tears beginning to gather in my eyes. "I truly apologize, my friend. My intention was never to cause you pain. However, I find myself at a loss regarding my next steps. John took his time before replying. He remained motionless, gazing at me with an expression that blended anguish and incredulity. In that instant, I realized he was gone from my life. Liza glanced back and forth between us, yet remained silent. She appeared equally adrift, equally shattered as I felt. The three of us lingered in that room, enveloped in the echoes of a betrayal that had taken everyone by surprise. Perhaps we require a bit of distance, John remarked at last, his tone icy and detached. I'm uncertain about the future, but I need some distance from you at this moment. With that, he exited the room, leaving me in solitude with Liza. I felt an emptiness within, as if the earth had suddenly vanished beneath my feet. I had just lost my closest companion, and uncertainty loomed over what would unfold next. The days that followed the confrontation were the most challenging of my existence. I haven't heard a word from John. I lingered in anticipation, hoping he would extend a hand, seek clarity, or offer me the opportunity to mend what was broken, yet silence prevailed. It felt as though he had wiped me from his existence. Liza, in contrast, would sometimes send me texts, yet her messages were brief and filled with apologies, never providing any insight into the situation between us. I found myself in my apartment, endlessly revisiting thoughts and memories in my mind. How did it reach this point? My intention was never to cause John any pain. My intention was never to ruin our friendship, yet that is precisely what I ended up doing. What's the most frustrating aspect? I was unsure of how to reverse it. One evening, I resolved that action was necessary. I could no longer remain concealed within the confines of my apartment. I had to confront the truth of my actions, and it was essential for me to express my apologies to both of them, regardless of the weight of my emotions. I reached out to Liza. She picked up on the second ring, her voice soft and tinged with uncertainty. Hello. I embarked on this journey, feeling uncertain about how to take the first step. I believe it's time for a conversation. Concerning all matters. A lengthy silence hung in the air before she finally uttered a word. I'm uncertain if that's the best course of action at this moment. I sensed her distress, yet there was an underlying nuance in her voice. Perhaps a sense of guilt? Remorse? Whatever it was, it caused a tumult in my stomach. I had to persevere, nonetheless. I understand. I realize I've caused a lot of chaos, but I can no longer act as if this situation doesn't exist. John is entitled to the truth. He should understand that it wasn't solely your doing. I was part of it as well, and I owe him an apology. I want him to understand that I'm not merely someone who has broken his trust. Liza remained silent for what felt like an eternity, and just as I began to believe she would remain mute, she finally broke the stillness, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling slightly. Do you honestly believe I would pay attention to what you have to say? I must give it a shot. I responded, my tone steady even though I felt shattered within. I've destroyed it all. I will make an effort to remedy the situation. We decided to gather the following day at a quaint little cafe that had been a familiar haunt for all of us over the years. Upon my arrival, I felt a surge of anxiety coursing through me. I sensed I was stepping into a tempest, uncertain whether it would shatter me or offer the opportunity to reconstruct what had been taken from me. John occupied a table in the corner, already present and waiting. His expression remained a mystery, his gaze fixed on the coffee cup before him. Liza sat opposite him, her hands neatly folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the table. The atmosphere was charged with an intensity that was almost unbearable. I inhaled deeply and approached them, attempting to calm my trembling hands as I settled into my seat. Silence enveloped them, and in that stillness, I understood that the moment I had been fearing for days had finally arrived. I must extend my sincerest apologies to both of you. I started, my voice trembling ever so slightly. I recognize that my actions and what transpired between us were misguided. I understand that a simple apology won't restore things to their former state, but I want you to truly grasp how deeply remorseful I am. My intention was never to cause pain to either of you, particularly you, John. I consider you my closest companion, and I have let you down. I can't undo what I've done, but I'm eager to set things straight, if you'll allow me the chance. John took his time before replying. He merely gazed at me, his eyes weary, and for a fleeting moment, I believed he might turn and leave. Yet, when he finally spoke, his voice was softer than I had ever experienced. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, he said, his voice thick with anguish. Your actions are not something I can easily overlook, yet I also wish to preserve our friendship for the long haul. I require some time to reflect on this matter. I nodded, fully grasping the situation. I understood that seeking forgiveness was not my place, and I had no intention of imposing on him. Liza spoke next, her voice more gentle than I had anticipated. This was never my intention, and I can't even comprehend why it unfolded this way. I have deep feelings for John, I truly do, yet, I find myself lost in the confusion of it all. John's eyes darted toward her, and in that moment, for the first time since my arrival, I caught a glimpse of something, perhaps pain, but also a trace of comprehension. I believe we all found ourselves a bit lost, I said softly, yet it doesn't alter the reality that I caused pain to both of you. I don't anticipate a return to the way things were. I wanted to express my sincerest apologies. The stillness enveloped us, yet I found a sense of freedom within it. It wasn't resolved, not by any means, but perhaps it marked the beginning of something. At last, John turned his gaze back to me, a hint of warmth creeping into his expression. I'm uncertain about what lies ahead, but I'm not prepared to bid farewell to our friendship just yet. Let's wait and see how everything unfolds. It wasn't an ideal conclusion. There were no certainties, no assurances that everything would revert to its former state, yet in that instant, I sensed a flicker of optimism. Perhaps, just perhaps, there existed a possibility for us to restore what was lost. Liza's eyes glistened with unshed tears, yet she remained silent, offering no further words. She was under no obligation to do so. I comprehend. In reality, nothing would ever return to how it once was. The events that transpired between us are indelible, yet they need not dictate our identities moving forward. The echoes of betrayal would inevitably remain, haunting the corridors of memory. Perhaps, just perhaps, there remained a glimmer of hope for us all to discover tranquility.